Rain drizzled over the quiet streets of Brookhaven, Georgia, turning the asphalt into a sheen of trembling lights under the faded glow of traffic signals. It was late afternoon, the hour when commuters were half lost in the thoughts of home, their minds dulled by repetition and routine. The sound of tires slicing through wet roads was constant ordinary until a scream ripped through the monotony, tearing reality apart in an instant. From a speeding gray SUV, the back passenger door flung open. It wasn't a stumble or a fall. It was a deliberate act, desperate and wild. Anna Parker, just 7 years old, hurled herself into the chaos of moving traffic. Her small body hit the ground, hard knees scraping over the wet grit of the road. Horns blared. A delivery truck braked with a howl that seemed to shake the entire intersection. Cars swerved, drivers shouting in confusion and panic. Anna tried to stand but collapsed again, her palms raw and bleeding. Rain mingled with her tears as she forced herself up once more. Trembling breath, ragged, her heart pounding with the kind of terror only pure instinct could create. Her voice cut through the night like a blade. "Help me! He's going to hurt me!" For a moment, no one moved. The scene was too surreal, too shocking. Then through the stunned crowd, a woman ran forward. Martha Green, silver-haired and dressed in a heavy green coat, didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arms around the child and pulled her close, shielding her from the world. Anna clutched at Martha's coat with trembling fingers, her face hid in her body, convulsing with sobs. The SUV did not stop. It vanished into the traffic ahead, swallowed by distance and darkness. Others rushed in, a young man fumbling for his phone, a teenager offering his jacket, a nurse kneeling to check Anna's injuries. Through it all, Anna's cries echoed a raw testament to the nightmare she had escaped. The sirens came next, sharp and insistent, slicing through the wet evening air. Within minutes, the flashing lights of police and an ambulance painted the street in red and blue. Anna was lifted carefully onto a stretcher, still gripping Martha's hand. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, her voice a whisper now, repeating a single word over and over: "Mommy." As the ambulance doors slammed shut, Detective Marcus Hale arrived on the scene. He took in the sight of the scattered crowd, the skid marks on the road, the trembling woman who had saved the girl. And then his gaze fell on Anna. The name came through a police radio moments later: Anna Parker missing for 72 hours from Riverside, Kentucky. The case had crossed state lines. Hale's jaw tightened. He looked at Martha and said quietly, "You saved her life tonight." And somewhere out there, a man named Ethan Cole drove through the rain, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Stay with us. At the end of this chapter, if you're moved by Anna's story, subscribe to our channel. Real stories deserve to be heard, and your support helps us keep telling them. Tonight, 3 days earlier, life had been painfully ordinary. The morning sun filtered through faded curtains in a modest home in Riverside, Kentucky. Rebecca Parker stood at the kitchen counter, rushing to pack her daughter's lunch. Anna sat at the table, swinging her legs, humming to herself as she munched on cereal. The smell of coffee, peanut butter, and toast filled the air, a scene so familiar that no one imagined it would soon shatter. Rebecca slipped a small note into Anna's lunchbox. "Be brave. Be kind. I love you." Anna smiled when she found it, folding it carefully into her pocket like a secret treasure. They hugged before Rebecca left for her shift at the hospital. She kissed her daughter's hair, breathing in the lavender scent of last night's bath. It was supposed to be just another day. But at 3:41 p.m., the phone rang. It was the school office, their tone unusually calm, almost too calm. "Mrs. Parker, is Anna with you?" Confused, Rebecca answered no. Anna was supposed to be in the after-school program. "She never showed up," came the reply. "We thought you picked her up early." The room tilted. Rebecca gripped the counter, her breath vanishing like smoke. She drove to the school in a blur, questions spiraling in her mind. Teachers searched hallways, classmates whispered fragments of stories. Some said Anna had been seen talking to someone near the fence. Others thought she'd gone to the bathroom and never returned. Security footage offered only a grainy glimpse Anna walking toward a side door alone. By 6 o'clock, an official missing child report had been filed. By 9, an Amber Alert spread across the state. Rebecca's house filled with strangers, officers, volunteers, neighbors, bringing food she couldn't eat. Flyers with Anna's smiling face multiplied, taped to every lamppost and window. The world blurred into a haze of worry and exhaustion. Rebecca sat on her daughter's bed, clutching a worn teddy bear, whispering Anna's name into the silence. Somewhere in that same silence far away, Anna was alone, afraid and waiting. Long before his name appeared on any police report, Ethan Cole had been a shadow drifting between towns and false identities. He grew up in Redwood, Texas, in a house that smelled of oil and dust, where walls echoed with anger and silence. His father, Walter Cole, a former soldier, carried the battlefield home with him, his discipline turning into cruelty behind closed doors. Ethan learned early that crying was dangerous, that stillness was survival. He stopped speaking, stopped hoping. When he was 15, his younger sister died. No police came. No funeral was held. His father simply said, "Weak things don't last," and they never spoke of her again. At 16, Ethan ran away for good. He wandered through cities and states, living under bridges and in alleys until he met Victor Hayes. Victor gave him food, shelter, and a purpose. The purpose was simple. Victor had said, "We move people." Ethan didn't ask questions. He learned to drive certain routes to pick up and deliver without making a sound. Over time, he became efficient, invisible, a ghost in the system. When he met Rebecca Parker at a coffee shop 4 months before Anna's disappearance, he wore the mask of a kind, wounded man. He smiled when he was supposed to. He listened carefully but never revealed too much. To Rebecca, he seemed safe. To Anna, he seemed like a friend. But to himself, Ethan was nothing more than an echo of orders given by someone far away. He didn't know why they wanted Anna. He didn't care, until he saw her eyes, clear blue, filled with something he couldn't name. And, for the first time, the mask cracked. This concludes Part 1 of Anna Parker's story. If you want to hear what happens next, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us. Every week we bring you real powerful stories that deserve to be heard. The cabin outside Ashfield had a way of inhaling and exhaling like a weary animal, its wooden ribs creaking with each shift of wind. Moisture clung to the air, a patient veil that dulled every sound and blurred the lines where walls met floor. What light entered arrived in thin, uncertain bands through crooked slats and a patchwork of boarded windows. Dust hung motionless as if the room were the inside of a held breath. Anna Parker learned the language of the place quickly. The roof had 3 voices, the slow tick of condensed drops, the nervous patter that came with gusts, and the sudden sharp tap that startled the silence when a branch skimmed the shingles. The floor announced footsteps long before a figure appeared. One loose board near the door complained in a stifled groan. Another by the cot sighed with a weary resignation each time she shifted her weight. She mapped the room in careful inches. A cot with a thin blanket that smelled of damp rope. A chair whose paint had surrendered to time in flaking turquoise tears. A small crate serving as a table upon which sat a plastic cup and the memory of apples. A nail head on the wall, not quite hammered flush, that caught the light like a star. At night, she listened to tiny lives in the rafters, mice perhaps, or something else that understood hiding. She counted heartbeats until counting became a rope she could hold. Ethan Cole came and went like weather. He was never loud. He never let the door slam. His movements were measured a choreography learned for the sake of leaving no marks. He kept his eyes a fraction to the side of Anna's face, a practiced evasion that read as distance, until she noticed the edges, how his hands sometimes trembled, how his breath snagged for a beat when her shoes scraped the floor too quickly. He set food down without comment. He checked the boarded window with the ritual of a superstition. He stood in the doorway longer than necessary, as if waiting for permission from some invisible authority only he could hear. On the second morning, if morning could be trusted by the slant of light, he placed a small, worn teddy bear on the crate. Its left ear was missing, and the red ribbon at its throat had been tied and retied so often that the knot looked fossilized. Anna didn't reach for it at first. She watched it the way one watches a closed door, aware that what waits behind might not be kind. When she finally pressed it to her cheek, the fabric was rough with age, and inside the belly beneath a ridge of uneven stitches something hard pressed back against her palm. She did not panic. She listened. The cabin said nothing new. Ethan's footsteps receded. Wind gathered itself and lay down again. With the edge of a bitten nail, she worried the seam, each thread releasing like a quiet yes. The object slid into her hand, a fingernail-sized rectangle wrapped in thin plastic. She had seen one before in a school computer lab. The teacher had called it memory. Anna wrapped the plastic in another layer of patience and tucked the piece into the waistband of her pants. The bear returned to its cot post innocent again. Nothing in the room had changed, and yet everything had. Secrets have a weight, and even small ones tilt the world. That night she unlearned fear in small portions and practiced breath as a tool. She could not open the door. She could not undo the boards without noise. But she could keep watch over the single fact she now carried, and she could wait for the pattern to shift. Patterns always do. Ascend. In Riverside, Rebecca Parker moved through her house as if it were a museum of a life, paused mid-sentence. Shoes by the door in the exact tilt of a hurry, a cereal bowl, rinsed but not washed, a crayon's waxy cylinder resting where a small hand had left it beside a drawing of a sun with eyelashes. The refrigerator hummed with the nonchalance of appliances that have no idea what emergency feels like. At the precinct, Detective Marcus Hale arranged details into rows that might become meaning. He knew the mathematics of vanishing gaps in footage time cards that don't align witness accounts that bend around fear. He also knew something else, that desperation can be a compass with a broken needle and still somehow point true. The FBI set up a field command in a borrowed conference room that smelled faintly of dry erase markers and old coffee. Special Agent Clara Nguyen brought order with her, a calm that made space for sharper minds to work. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, it was to ask questions that rearranged the air. A whiteboard gathered names and times like a timeline in the snow, revealing tracks no one had noticed. Rebecca signed forms, each signature a small surrender she offered to the necessary machinery of help. She learned to answer the same questions in the same order without losing pieces of herself along the way. If you asked where she was at 3:41 p.m., she could place every breath. If you asked what Anna had been wearing, she could describe the stitching along the hem as if it were scripture. She slept in minutes, sitting up bleach on her hands from scrubbing counters that were already clean. Somewhere along the backbone of interstate roads, Ethan drove. The truck stoplights along the route were small constellations against the throat of night. He relived miles the way some men relive mistakes. Victor Hayes existed in those miles as a shape rather than a man, a voice that carried the coolness of a closed ledger. For years, Victor had built in Ethan that coolness, the gift and curse of detachment. It was a scaffolding that allowed difficult deeds to feel like tasks. But the scaffolding had acquired a hairline crack the moment a child with clear eyes studied him without flinching. Ethan parked behind the cabin and rested his forehead on the steering wheel. Memory came in flashes rather than a story. Redwood, the smell of gun oil in a hot room. Walter Cole instructing silence the way other fathers teach football, a sister's laugh cut short by a door. The only hand that had reached down to pull him from that version of Earth belonged to Victor. Gratitude is a subtle chain. In the morning, Hale stood beside Clara as messages clicked open on a screen. A technician with careful hands and a shy smile presented the first breadcrumbs, a prepaid phone's pattern of life that looked almost like a heartbeat, a vehicle caught on a traffic camera one county over, a purchase of fuel for cash near Ashfield. Each data point leaned toward the next. In a fluorescent quiet, Clara said nothing about hope, but hope adjusted its chair and sat a little closer. If you want more stories told with care and courage, remember to subscribe. Your support helps bring real voices to light, and it keeps us going one true story at a time. Damn you. The day turned like a page the wind insists on reading. Inside the cabin, the temperature shifted from the cool of morning to a midday stiffness. Anna traced the room with her eyes until its parts became a sequence. She needed intervals, not exits a rhythm she could interrupt. She watched Ethan's routine with the patience of rain learning the map of a roof. He checked the door twice. He checked the window 3 times. He placed a bottle of water at the same angle on the crate each time as if alignment could keep chaos from asking questions. Before he left, he sometimes sat on the chair as though he had just remembered it existed. His shoulders folded forward. In those pauses, the air between them felt like a spill. Neither of them knew how to wipe up. Anna practiced choices in silence. If he left the bottle too close to the edge, she would let it fall to study the speed of his reaction. If the board by the door groaned, she would memorize the exact weight that made it speak and the amount that kept it quiet. If his keys jingled, she would count how many notes were on the ring and the distance between their sounds when he walked. A child's mind is an engine when given a single tiny gear. The teddy bear watched from the cot, a witness disguised as comfort. Inside Anna's waistband, the small rectangle pressed like a reminder. She thought of her mother not as an image, but as a set of gestures, the smoothing of hair behind an ear, the tuck of a blanket, the way hands hover for a second before completing a tenderness. She built from those gestures a small room inside herself where fear could not rearrange the furniture. That afternoon, Ethan returned with a paper bag that smelled of fuel and rain. He placed it on the crate and looked not at Anna, but at a point on the wall where a knot in the wood had formed an eye. The mask he wore had begun to itch. He scratched at it by staring past the world. Far away, Rebecca stood before a camera at the edge of a parking lot while news vans wrote hunger into the air with their satellite dishes. She did not speak. She held a flyer with Anna's photograph and the word "missing" above a phone number like a desperate prayer. The crowd became the chorus of a single sentence, "Bring her home." In the command room, Clara and Hale worked a map with thread and pins. The route of a gray SUV in Brookhaven. The timestamp of an amber light. A witness description of a dent on the rear bumper. A convenience store clerk who remembered a man who never looked at anyone when he paid. Every fact is a door. When you believe there must be a house. As evening folded itself along the lines of the woods, Anna noticed the first true change when Ethan locked the door. His hand lingered as if muscle memory had forgotten its cue. He opened it and checked the latch again. On the third check, keys snagged on the metal lip made a sound that startled him. He swore softly into the floorboards, then pocketed the ring with an unpracticed motion. Something had shifted beyond the cabin. Schedules no longer trusted themselves. The world was unbuttoning by a single hole. She did not know when the chance would arrive, only that it would be brief and it would cost. Fear prepared its argument. Courage arranged a simpler one, if not now, then never. She tested the board by the door with the slow patience of the careful. It breathed, but did not speak. She waited for wind so the window's slat could complain on her behalf. When Ethan returned close to dusk, the sky carried the bruised blue of unasked questions. He did not sit. He turned the chair toward the door like a guard dog and stood above it. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand until the skin paled. The mask was slipping. He could feel the draft. Anna counted breaths. Ethan counted reasons. Somewhere beyond, counting the chapter, readied its turn. Ted. On the road into Brookhaven, moisture rose off the pavement like memory lifting from a dream. Traffic gathered at the hour when lights flicker from caution to certainty and back again. Ethan kept the SUV to the right lane as if the white line on the shoulder could instruct him in virtue he did not own. Inside the vehicle, the air smelled faintly of old fries and a life that belonged to someone else. The door lock near Anna's hand did not carry the stubborn weight it once had. The handle felt like a possibility. She pressed her knees together to quiet their tremor and rehearsed the small choreography that would answer a question every child hopes never to face: how to jump and keep living. She did not look at him. She studied the geometry of the intersection ahead. 2 cars left one behind a delivery truck idling across the silent metronome of a blinking light. She had counted at the last crossing 17 seconds of red. 17 seconds is not much, but it is not nothing. The difference between a door and a wall can be the width of a hand. Back in Riverside, Rebecca sat before the map as Clara traced with a fingertip the path their suspect would likely take to avoid cameras. Hale called out distances. A technician rotated footage frame by careful frame until the gray blur acquired the dignity of a line. Phones rang and were answered, the room a hive built of verbs. A text arrived on a secure device, coordinates near the city limit, a tag referencing a traffic loop whose maintenance camera had survived storms, others had not. Clara glanced up and the room's heartbeat increased by 1. In the SUV, Ethan drummed his fingers against the wheel in a rhythm that belonged to a much younger boy and a much older fear. He told himself the story Victor had taught him. This is only movement. This is logistics. This is weather. But the story snagged on the fact of a child who sat upright without asking for anything, who watched the world with quiet that did not plead. He felt the old chain of gratitude tighten at his throat, and with it another chain he had not named, the one forged of choices you can no longer forgive yourself for making. The light shifted. Red rose like a commandment. The SUV slowed. Sound narrowed to tire hiss and engine breath. Anna placed her palm on the handle. There are moments when the body becomes an instrument of a single note. She thought of the teddy bear, the seam, the small secret pressing against her hip. She thought of her mother's hands. She thought of the color of the hallway light at home, the way it turned ordinary darkness into a safer kind. She unlatched. The door answered with a soft click that felt louder than thunder. Wet air lunged into the vehicle. The city's noise assembled itself into a chorus not of voices but of motion. She pushed. Time disassembled. The street came up not like an enemy, but like a truth. Pain registered as bright static, then dimmed under purpose. Horns lifted, brakes screamed. The delivery truck's grill became a wall Anna would never touch. She rolled and gathered her small frame toward the curb, each breath a brief contract with tomorrow. The SUV didn't stop. It became a sentence someone else would finish. Hands arrived. A coat encircled her. The human world crowded back into view. Martha Green steady as a lighthouse. A teenager offering warmth. A nurse making space of calm inside panic. Above it all, a siren's promise cut through rain and doubt. And far down the road, Ethan pressed the accelerator as if distance could absolve. In the minutes that followed, the threads converged. The ambulance door shut on the name Anna Parker, just as Marcus Hale stepped from his car into the wash of red-blue light. Clara and Nguyen watched the traffic loop feed pop into clarity on a screen states away. The recording captured a slivered image, a gray SUV, a dent where a dent should be a timestamp that matched a mother's breath. The city exhaled. The cabin, back in Ashfield, was suddenly only wood again. And in a room where maps learned to mean, a woman let herself imagine for the first time in 3 days. A door opening, a small voice saying nothing, because nothing would be necessary. In the quiet hum of the field office, machines did the talking. Screens lit the room with the pale glow of diligence, and the air buzzed with the soft industry of keys and careful breaths. Special Agent Clara Nguyen stood behind the glass of the digital forensics lab as if watching weather form a front gathering a storm, thinking itself into being. Detective Marcus Hale took the place at her side that had become his hands loosely folded, focus steady. On the other side of the glass, a technician slid a micro SD card into a reader attached to an air-gapped workstation. The machine hesitated, recognized, and opened the door. Files populated in neat rows, numbers, not names. It looked harmless. It was anything but. The first document resembled a ledger without context, entry codes, dates, short descriptors that meant little until they meant everything. A second file contained images that the system refused to show at first, as if resisting its own assignment. When the thumbnails loaded, the room seemed to lean closer. Cameras perched somewhere beyond fences had captured children in ordinary moments waiting for buses, racing each other to the corner, stopping to tie a shoelace. Metadata clung to the pixels like burrs. Timestamps, coordinates, weather notes, the clinical facts of a watching eye. Clara did not speak. She tapped to the next folder route maps that braided across state lines with colored pins marking pickups and drop-offs. Tags repeated along the edges handled pending reroute, and a colder word that no one said aloud. A final file was a brief video, no face, only. A voice from behind, something heavy, and a child's responses that stayed just this side of audible. The technician stopped it after seconds enough to confirm what it was and what it would be in court. There near the bottom of the ledger, a line held together the horror and the hope. Anna Parker status field left open, date fields blank. A plan interrupted. Hale exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath since the day he chose this work. Clara rested a fingertip against the glass as if to steady the room itself. Evidence does not save a child she knew. People do. But evidence builds a bridge people can cross. The technician exported hashes, recorded chain of custody, sealed redundancies created without ever touching the internet. On a separate monitor, an analyst overlaid the card's coordinates on an interstate map. A small cluster of points glowed near Ashfield and then angled toward Brookhaven like a trail of crumbs someone had not meant to drop. Clara turned from the glass to the board where red thread stitched counties together. She did not need to say what came next. Hale already had the car keys in his pocket. Far away, in a hospital room that had learned a child's breathing, Anna Parker lay still, the flat rhythm of exhaustion slowly warming into sleep. Rebecca Parker watched her daughter's face the way sailors watch horizon lines looking for changes too subtle to name. The new teddy bear sat on the chair by the window, soft and uncomplicated, a promise with stitched eyes. Martha's scarf hung from the bed rail like a flag of gentleness. Night gathered itself outside and the investigation's pulse grew clearer. Morning arrived with a brief mercy-thin sunlight sketching the edges of roofs and asphalt, a sky that wanted to be ordinary. The command room refused the suggestion. Coffee hardened into its purpose maps added a fresh layer of meaning, and Clara and Nguyen assembled a quiet, efficient task force. The warrants marched across printers. Vehicles idled like stagehands waiting for their cue. On a long wall, a new display came online, a relationship graph spinning from the data on the micro SD card, cross-referenced with older cases that had slept for years. The name, Ethan Cole, hovered at the lower spine of the network connected to vehicles' burner numbers, a sequence of fuel stops and cash withdrawals that obeyed a schedule disguised as randomness. Higher up, the connections, thinned labels collapsed into initials and fragments. In the blankest center was a placeholder that the model refused to fill, a vacancy so deliberate it might as well have been a signature. Clara drew a slow circle with the tip of a marker. Victor Hayes would not write his name where anyone could find it, but absence can be as loud as a trumpet when every other space is occupied. Marcus Hale worked the phones that required a whole different kind of credential, hard-won goodwill. He called a state trooper he trusted 2 counties over, a clerk at a supply depot who remembered faces better than forms, a tollway tech who knew which cameras in which storms tended to survive. He asked for what could be asked, and he listened for what could not. At the periphery of the effort, something else moved. A staffer named Ryan Merritt, quiet, punctual. The kind of agent whose notes were always a little too neat, drifted between the screens with the practiced invisibility of a man used to not being seen. He read the board the way a person reads a room, locating the handful of facts that mattered. From the corner, he sent a text he should not have sent to a number that lived outside official memory. It contained the barest of descriptions, timing shape intent enough to warn, not enough to indict. Down the hall, Clara felt rather than noticed the tiniest turbulence. The way a door that should have closed perfectly will on a humid day refuse to lie flush. She filed the sensation the way she filed faces from an interview, beneath the threshold of speech but near the center of attention. By early afternoon, the breadcrumbs aligned. The Ashfield cabin pinged from a wildlife camera that a conservation group had positioned to monitor migration. It had caught the gray SUV framed between trees a dent where a dent had been described the timestamp only hours old. A second team worked a warrant for a rural property title that had passed through shell names with all the subtlety of a disappearing coin. Behind two of those names was a bank that 30 years ago had accepted a cashier's check from a young man in Redwood, Texas, who liked to pay in cash and never answered questions twice. Walter Cole had left more evidence than he knew, and some of it had become a rope that decades later could still pull. Clara briefed the approach. No heroics, no improvisations. They would use the fog that the morning promised the tree line to cover entry and the cabin's lazy architecture against itself. The arrest would be clean or not at all. At the edge of the parking lot, Rebecca Parker stood with Martha Green hands wrapped around paper cups that cooled faster than conversation could warm. Rebecca did not ask what the agents were doing. She had learned the posture of waiting without contaminating hope. Martha, who had saved a girl once by doing the right thing at the wrong time, understood the strange courage of stillness. The convoy moved. The screen with the map became a slow wave of signals that greened toward the objective. On a road that had been oak and dust long before it knew the sound of engines' tires carved their quiet intention into the day. Back in the building, Ryan Merritt moved to an auxiliary terminal and authenticated with a badge that had been issued for diligence and used just now to minimize it. A message went out to the number that had asked for it. In a room no one in the building had seen a phone vibrated against a glass tabletop. Miles away, a man with a careful smile read the warning and decided to count backward from 10. Victor Hayes believed in subtraction. It made everything cleaner. In the forest outside Ashfield, an old cabin waited for the sound of boots. Fog braided through the trees at dawn, holding its own counsel. The cabin sat at the center of a small clearing not so much placed as forgotten. Clara and Nguyen watched from behind a stand of pine while the team formed its practiced arc. Radios murmured instructions that everyone already knew as much ritual as plan. Marcus Hale took the rear approach, the angle of humility a habit of men who prefer to arrive where they are least expected. Thermal confirmed a single figure near the window, seated still. On Clara's signal, the door went the way of old doors under sudden pressure, an inward gasp of splinters and surrender. The man inside did not run. Ethan Cole sat on a crate, hands slack, eyes tired in the way that suggests a surrender to something larger than consequence. He looked neither surprised nor defiant, as if the moment had been rehearsed in a dream that never varied. Cuffs were applied, rights were read. The room took inventory: a cot, a chair, a backpack, a plastic bag with receipts, a laptop still warm. On the desk, a prepaid phone vibrated once and stilled its warning message, arriving too late to matter. Hale lifted the lid of the laptop the way one might lift a stone that hums. Password prompts yielded to habits of repetition, dates disguised as randomness, names reversed but not reinvented. Beneath the common locks lay more careful ones, encryption with a respect for itself. Forensics imaged the drive on site, wrote hashes, sealed containers. The device exhaled its history in silence. Data scrolled copies of documents matching the microSD card, yes, but more a ledger of transfers hinted at, but never traced chat logs between aliases that had spoken to aliases long enough to believe themselves real rote memos that treated children like cargo in a climate-controlled chain. Most important were the misalignments, blank fields where a name should be consistent, gaps that appeared like a stutter in a pattern otherwise fluent. Someone above had understood that absence is a kind of armor. Clara leaned over a line that repeated every few pages 3 letters that formed a tag VHX. Not a name, barely a mark, but like a watermark, it persisted wherever orders condensed into instruction. You do not need to see a signature to know a hand. Back at the command room, the harvest began. Screens filled with map overlays, call graphs, a cascade of reconciling ledgers that reached out to other cases and offered them context. Every fresh match felt like a locked door admitting air. Analysts with steady nerves raised quiet flags. A prosecutor's checklist grew teeth, and yet, at the core, the network kept its face turned away. If this was a body, they had the limbs. Some organs, the nervous systems routing everything except the head. Victor Hayes remained a rumor with excellent manners. In an interview room with the temperature set to discourage bravado, Ethan Cole sat alone, tethered to the table by a legal necessity that outweighed symbolism. His pulse had learned a slow rhythm, each beat an echo of years spent obeying men who never signed their orders. He thought of Redwood, the heat in summer, the heaviness in winter, the ugliness that did not need a season. He remembered Walter Cole teaching lessons as if they were answers. He remembered the first time Victor had said he could stay the night in a place with clean sheets. Clara entered with a file, sat, and did not open it. Marcus Hale stood by the wall, projecting nothing in particular. This was the part that tempted performance, and neither of them believed in it. Clara spoke little. Facts arranged themselves on the table like objects you cannot return once you confess they are yours. She did not ask Ethan why. She did not need his origin story. The files had already supplied the plot. She asked for the present and for the names that anchored it to accountability. Ethan looked at the mirror that was not a mirror and traced his own outline with his eyes as if confirming he was still there. The chain of gratitude wrapped around his throat again, the link with a child's face on it, brightest, cruelest. He managed a sentence he had not practiced. "I never saw him," he said, and the words were both true and cowardly. They kept faces apart, voices only. Clara let the silence do what questions sometimes cannot. The agent in the observation room shifted his weight. Hale, patient to the bone, waited for the tide to return what it had taken. What came back was not a confession, but a pivot. With the laptop's flood now in custody and the card's contents corroborated, the case no longer depended on the man at the table. It had become a scaffold anyone could climb to see the roof. Ethan's utility shrank to a doorway. Would he open it a little wider, or not at all? From her chair, Clara could nearly see the shape of Victor Hayes in the negative space of the network, an investor in disappearances. A long patience seated in a high room somewhere that believed itself untouchable. She thought of the children on the screen, the ordinary grace of their postures, the lives that had been measured by other people's logistics. The room brightened and dimmed with the soft flicker of fluorescent fate. Down the hall, a small disturbance grew legs. Ryan Merritt had begun to prepare a second warning for the number that needed it, this one more explicit. He pressed send. The action hung in the air an instant too long. Marcus Hale opened the door at that instant and asked a question that was really a statement. Ryan's face found the age it had avoided. Security protocols moved like a tide coming in without permission. The second warning died in a quarantine folder where it could do no more harm. Clara received the news with a stillness that suggested relief could sometimes be an absence rather than an arrival. A mole in an investigation is a wound that bleeds trust. Catching one before the clot forms is mercy by another name. She filed the name, Ryan Merritt, under a different board, one labeled with a future that would not look like employment. At sunset, the convoy returned from Ashfield with evidence sealed, and a suspect whose silence had become irrelevant. The field office filled with the sound of printers and the scratch of pens of wheels finally finding purchase on a road that had been mud. In a hospital room where the day's noise could not enter, Anna woke from a nap without remembering to be afraid. Rebecca watched the surprise of calm arrive on her daughter's face and let herself borrow a small measure of it. Martha had left earlier with a wave that promised more visits, more cookies, more stories in which bravery was something you rested from rather than aimed at. Back in a city where men liked to watch the news with the sound down, Victor Hayes stood before a window and saw his reflection overlaid on a segment about the Ashfield arrest. He adjusted his cufflinks the way some people adjust a painting. On his desk, a tidy list shed one name and gathered another. He did not frown. He did not hurry. He believed in remainders, the quiet arithmetic of those who trust time to be an ally. The investigation was no longer a search for a missing girl. It had become a map of a country inside a country, a system that treated children as variables in a formula designed to profit from absence. And still there was a child who had torn a seam and carried out a small card with a larger future pressed into its plastic. The light that breaks through does not apologize for what it reveals. It makes new work and calls it necessary. Night fell with that assignment still on the board. The courtroom did not breathe. It held its air the way a room holds grief quietly and without asking permission. Light filtered in through narrow windows too bright for the faces below, casting long bars across polished wood and worn carpet. At the center sat Ethan Cole, hands folded, wrists free of shackles but bound by circumstance. His eyes never rose above the table before him. He traced invisible patterns in the grain of the wood, following the paths the way a lost traveler might follow a river. The trial unfolded with the precision of gears turning. Evidence was laid out in sequences: the files from the micro SD card, the maps from the laptop, the testimony of analysts who spoke softly but carried the weight of hundreds of missing names. Screens illuminated images of routes and timestamps. Children captured unaware the threads of a network that spanned states and seasons. The voices were calm. That was the worst part. Calmness made it real. Clara and Nguyen took the stand, last her words clipped and deliberate. She described not only what had been found, but what had been prevented, the delivery that never happened, the places that would never see a small face vanish into their margins. She did not look at Ethan as she spoke. Mercy sometimes lives in the choice not to see. Rebecca Parker did not attend. She waited in a separate room, Anna seated beside her, unaware of the exact shape of justice being argued on her behalf. Anna held a crayon and sketched a picture of a house with a single warm light in the window. It was enough. The verdict came without ceremony. Life plus 40 years. Words that sounded like numbers until you realized they measured silence. Ethan did not react. His surrender had been spent elsewhere, in a cabin in a car, in a moment when he realized that gratitude could be a prison as much as freedom. The gavel fell. The room exhaled. But outside, beyond the courthouse steps, cameras waited. Headlines had already been written, phrases like "monstrous network dismantled" and "hero child saves dozens." Each word was both true and incomplete, because no sentence could hold the full measure of what had been lost and what had been salvaged. Healing did not arrive with trumpets. It came quietly on soft feet and often left again before anyone noticed. In the hospital, Anna learned to sleep without flinching at every sound. Rebecca stayed close, her presence a constant tide that refused to recede. At night, she smoothed Anna's hair and whispered the same sentence over and over: "You're safe now." She said it for her daughter, and she said it for herself. Martha Green visited often, her scarf always trailing the faint scent of cinnamon. She brought cookies and stories, her voice weaving a new kind of safety that was gentler than silence. Anna listened without speaking, but sometimes she smiled, a small, upward curve that felt like sunlight returning to a cold window pane. One afternoon, Anna handed Martha a drawing. It showed two figures holding hands beneath a sky full of uneven stars. Beneath the figures, in blocky letters, Anna had written "My angel." Martha did not cry, but her breath caught in her chest like a note held too long. The Parker home slowly returned to a rhythm that felt almost ordinary. The hallway light was replaced with a brighter bulb, a simple gesture of defiance against the dark. The windows received new locks, and the old teddy bear remained hidden away, replaced by one that held no secrets. Rebecca began to write letters she never intended to send, letters to other parents, to herself, to the version of the world where children did not need to be brave. She wrote about how easily safety can be imagined, and how quickly it can vanish. She wrote about listening truly. Listening to the small voices that carry warnings adults cannot always name. Anna started school again on a Tuesday. She wore a blue hoodie and carried a sticker in her lunchbox that read, "I am braver than I look." She didn't wear it, but when she found it, she smiled. The evening of Anna's return home was unremarkable in the way miracles often are. She sat on her bed beneath familiar posters, hugging the new teddy bear to her chest. Rebecca tucked her in the soft glow of the hallway light, spilling warmth into the room. For the first time in weeks, Anna closed her eyes without fear. Downstairs, Martha sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, watching the steam rise and vanish. The house felt whole again, not because the danger was gone, but because love had decided to stay. Miles away, in a room. No map acknowledged. Victor Hayes watched the evening news on a muted television. The footage showed Ethan's arrest, the courthouse steps, the reporters calling questions no one answered. Victor's reflection overlapped the image of Ethan being led away, and he smiled. On his desk lay a list, names neatly written, one crossed out with deliberate precision. Below it, a blank space waited hungry for the next entry. Victor tapped the paper once like a conductor signaling the next movement of a symphony only he could hear. "The game has just begun," he murmured, though no one was there to listen. He reached for his phone and dialed a number that did not exist on any record. Somewhere, another piece shifted into place. Back in Riverside, Anna stirred in her sleep, sensing nothing of the shadow still stretching its hand toward tomorrow. 10. Final note to the listener. This is where Anna's chapter closes, though the story of others like her continues. If her journey moved you, if you believe in stories that shine light on the darkest corners, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling these real powerful stories, because silence is never the answer, and every voice matters.